Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual training session on a very important topic, one which you all have been eagerly waiting for. And we're very, very pleased and proud to have two Education USA advisors from our very own region that have developed the expertise and come even with personal experience being a student athlete today. So we're very, very excited to have with us Brenda Pazoldan, Education USA Chile, presenting, as well as Jenica Heim, Education USA Canada, who both have, as I mentioned, been working very actively with student athletes, and we hope to learn a lot from their own experiences today and their expertise. Thank you both for agreeing to present with us today, and thank you again.
Okay, so I think that's my cue. Well, my name is Brenda Pazoldan. I'm the country coordinator in Chile. And a lot of my experience comes from personal experience as I played volleyball. I played volleyball for the junior national team in Peru. And then I was also, that's how I got a scholarship to go play volleyball at George Washington University, which is a Division I school. It belongs to Division I NCAA school. And where I attended and got my undergraduate degree from 1992 to 1996. And I'll let Jessica Heim introduce herself when she is presenting. So the presentation today is supporting our role as the Education USA Advisors in supporting student athletes, and give you some resources and some information in order to be able to assist students that might come into your offices and that are looking for ways to go to college on a sports scholarship. So we're going to go over the basic objectives and the information that we're going to present. So we're going to give you an overview of the athletic options, the different conferences and divisions and what that all means. Then we're also going to talk about eligibility, what kind of academic requirements as well as athletic requirements you need to meet in order to be able to play a sport at a university, how to get recruited, applying to universities and finding the best fit. And then we're just going to also go through a case study to kind of run through and go over the information that we will have learned today. And also just we'll navigate through the resources that we have compiled and put into a Google folder in order for you to have when you need to go back to refer to something. Okay, so basically there's three different options to play a sport in college. You'll hear a lot about the NCAA, that stands for the National Collegiate Athletic Association. You can also play a sport at an NAIA, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, and they also have now a National Junior College Athletic Association. The most competitive of all these associations, and the one that have the most scholarship, is the NCAA. The NCAA is divided into three divisions. So the Division I is the most competitive. It has the highest academics and the highest athletic levels as well. And they also have the most scholarships. There's approximately 350 universities that belong to a Division I NCAA the association. Then there's a Division II, which is also high in academic level, and it has a strong athletic level, but not quite as competitive as a Division I. They also have scholarships, but many times not as full or as big amounts as the Division I scholarship. And then you have Division III schools, which have strong academics, but they're not competitive in sports, and they do not offer sports scholarships. Now, this doesn't mean you can't get a scholarship, but just not a sports scholarship. Okay, then there's also the NAIA, which is, as I said, the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics. And they are also divided into Division I and II universities, and they also offer sports scholarships. And then now at the junior college level, there's also the NJCAA, which is also divided into the same system of divisions as NCAA, in the sense that you have Division I, which is the strongest division, and the one with most scholarships, Division II, which is not quite as strong as Division I, but they still have sports scholarships, and you have Division III, which do not have sports scholarships. This may seem basic to all, but I did once have a sports scholarship talk in Chile, and I had a student that came that was 36 years old, and he was like, I wanted to play golf at the university. So it's important for you to know that sports scholarships are only available at the undergraduate level. So if someone's going to be doing a master's, they will not be able to get a sports scholarship to play. Okay. Just general overview, there's over 1,000 schools that belong to the NCAA, with over 650 of those in Division I and II schools. There is a large amount of students playing, about over 300,000 student athletes in Division I and II schools. And this is also important for you to understand the conferences. When we talk about conferences, here it says that, for example, there's 32 conferences in Division I and 24 conferences in a Division II school. Conferences are basically the people, the other teams, the other universities. You play like in groups of 10 or 15 universities throughout the semester that you're playing. They used to be made up based on like location, but they're not so much anymore. So it's just different universities that agree to be on the same conference, and that's who you're playing throughout the season. And then usually the winner of the conference gets to play in the NCAA tournament. Okay. It's also important to understand that it is a competitive process. An average of 3 to 6% of students who play a sport during high school will obtain a sports scholarship. So it is really, it's for students that are, or student athletes that are playing at a competitive level, whether that be, it could be a competitive team in their school, but a lot of times it's more so than that, maybe playing at a club or a league, or even the national or junior national team. Okay, here is just for you to get an idea of the different sports that are available. There's 23 sports that belong that can be played at an NCAA university. This is also important. Not all, if a university has 20 sports, for example, they may have 18 sports teams that belong to a Division I university, and they may have 2 that belong to a Division II university. So that's important to check as well. Just because one university has a volleyball team that's part of Division I, it doesn't mean their water polo team will be part of Division I as well. And this classification basically is based on the resources that the university assigns to each sport, how much money is given and funds are available for the sports and the teams in these universities. So you see there's a wide range of sports: cross country, field hockey, soccer, gymnastics, volleyball, basketball. There's even beach volleyball now, triathlon, rugby. But here you can get an idea of the different sports available. NAIA will briefly go over the sports. They don't have quite as much of a selection. They don't have 23 sports as the NCAA does, but they do have, I counted it the other day, 16 sports that are offered. And the National Junior Collegiate Athletic Association also has a variety of sports that students can apply to play for in a team. Just some basic stats. We have over 150,000 undergraduate sports scholarships worth more than 600 million that are awarded each year. And the scholarships are awarded to men and women in 35 sports. The awards that the student athletes get can range from anywhere from $1,000 to a full scholarship. But as I said, these are, especially the full scholarships, are competitive. And they're based on the talent and the team's need and the available resources available that a university has and that each team has as well. So that is the basic overview of how the different associations that universities can belong to. And now we will go into eligibility, which is the part where Jenica will explain that to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot, Brenda. And
I'm coming. I know. Oh, wait, I'm trying to get out of here. Okay, sorry.
No problem. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and take on the next piece, which is eligibility. So give me 1 second here.
In the meantime, you can tell them what sport you played.
Yeah, so here's, okay, this is a really good example. This is actually going to bring to color exactly what Brenda was talking about. So Brenda, you got a full ride scholarship for volleyball, right?
I did.
Yeah, and volleyball is an all-in sport, which means that you can only get full rides or nothing, actually. Whereas I went to a school that was a Division II school, and the rowing team was a walk-on recruit team. So people just came and tried out and made it on the team. I got a scholarship also. My scholarship was for $1,000. So I think that shows kind of like the broad range. I wasn't recruited for NCAA athletics, but I was able to join the team because it was a less competitive sport and a newer sport for NCAA. Now rowing is definitely becoming more and more competitive. Okay. Usually the share screen is at the bottom of the screen here. Oh, there's okay.
There's a green thing. Okay.
I got it. All right. So let me skip ahead to the eligibility. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about eligibility requirements, and then as well as how students should be considering getting recruited. So the eligibility requirements are different for each league, and they're really the most strict for Division I and II in the NCAA. And that's because Division I and II are the most competitive athletic divisions. There's the most money at stake. Usually the most talented athletes, the ones who are potentially going to go to the Olympics or into professional sports, are being recruited to play in these divisions. And so there's a lot of regulations around NCAA Divisions I and II. So we're going to start by talking about the other divisions where the eligibility is a little bit more simple and a little more straightforward. So for Division III, because there are no athletic scholarships involved, the students only need to adhere to the university academic requirements. And students do get recruited for Division III athletics, and they can receive academic merit-based scholarships or needs-based scholarships. And of course, coming from Canada, I have a very different experience here. For example, hockey is only Division I and Division III. So Division III is incredibly competitive, and hockey players are heavily recruited into Division III, and then are given either merit or needs-based scholarships. What I tell students is the great thing about that is if you do want to quit your sport, you have the great opportunity or that you keep your scholarship. So that can be really nice as a safety valve for anybody who isn't quite sure if they want to play all 4 years. The NAIA, you have to meet 2 of the following 3 requirements. As you can see, the requirements are a fairly low, I think a fairly low minimum as far as students wanting to go to university. If a student isn't maintaining above a 2.0 GPA or is unable to get above those SAT or ACT minimums, I would think that maybe going to junior first might be a really good idea in order to help them boost their academics, because they might not be quite prepared for university if they're below those academic minimums. And then the NJCAA, of course, is a community college. As you all know, you basically just need to graduate high school to be eligible to go to community college. And you also need to just maintain your amateur status, which we're going to talk about more in an upcoming slide. So for NCAA Division I and II, the two, really what the NCAA does, you might hear it be called the NCAA clearinghouse, is kind of an old term. More they just call it the eligibility center these days. So they're trying to maintain 2 things and demonstrate that athletes are eligible in 2 ways. The first one is amateurism, and the second one is through academic eligibility through the 16 core courses and through taking a SAT or ACT exam. We have the caveat here that, of course, the university is going to require a student take a TOEFL, but the NCAA does not require TOEFL information as part of their eligibility process. The important thing to remember, and this is the hard part for students to understand, especially when you're working with grade 9, grade 10 students and they're interested in sports. These are parallel processes as far as, and Brenda's going to talk more about this, but registering for the NCAA and meeting all the NCAA requirements has very little to do with the university's requirements. And so you need to be meeting both and going through those separate processes to both be accepted by a coach into a sport and by the university into a program. So what a student should be doing, honestly, grade 10 is a good time to do this, is register for the NCAA Eligibility Center. So you have the link there, eligibilitycenter.org. It will take a student about 45 minutes to fill out their basic profile of their sport, their grades, their personal information. It costs about $135, so it is not inexpensive. And as students get further along in the process, this is where they need to be sending official transcripts in both the original language and with an English translation. And the NCAA is behind the times. You have to actually mail in. The counselors have to mail in the transcripts. There's nowhere where they're uploaded, unlike the Common Application. This is also where SAT and ACT scores need to go. When students sit and take their exam, they can use one of their free sends by putting in 9999, and the scores will be automatically sent to the NCAA. So any athlete should really be doing that when they take their tests. So what is amateurism? So there's a lot of things that might impact amateur status. And so when you're working with an athlete, it's just important that they're familiar with these things. For a lot of students who are involved in sports, amateurism is not a problem, especially if you're just playing with your high school team. But there are some sports where this becomes more of an issue. Anytime when there could be money involved, like in something like tennis or golf, or even a sport like soccer, where once you hit a certain level, you might be getting sponsored or paid to play. Even at a very minimal level, that will affect your amateur status. So it's important for students to be clear on these rules to make sure that they don't accidentally break them, because the second you do, you're no longer eligible to play Division I or II sports. And we're going to be referencing the NCAA guide for the college-bound student athlete. This is like the PDF. This is the PDF where you can get all of this information. It is your most favorite document. So this information is on page 24 of that document. Core courses. Now, for a lot of students, the core courses are going to be fairly parallel to what is required to graduate high school. But this can be different depending on what country you're from. And actually, in the case of Canada, it's different via province. So for example, when I go to British Columbia, they're like, oh yeah, eligibility, not a problem. Like, the eligibility requirements mirror our requirements at our school. So students have no issue in, graduating and being eligible to play. Whereas here in Ontario, we have a whole other set of challenges, because if students take this one particular English class in grade 9 and not a different English class, then they become ineligible even though they've taken all the other courses that they've needed to take over the other 4 years. So it's really important that you use the website ncaa.org/course list to look up what courses are considered for your core courses within your country. Again, Canada is unique because there's a lot of Canadians in the NCAA, so they break it up by province, but for most people, it's by country. There's actually another PDF, and Brenda's going to go over that. We have a repository that we're sharing with you that's going to have all this information. And there's an international document, and you can get all the information for your country. So you want to make sure, this is really the place where you're going to help out the most, is making sure students are doing their best to do their core courses. there's some rules that you need to be aware of, like this one's actually, to me, one of the most important. Once a student starts high school, they need to graduate on time in 4 consecutive years, and they need to complete their core courses. 15 out of 16 core courses need to be completed by the time they graduate. They are allowed to take 1 core course after graduation. So maybe in summer school, or some students who want to take a gap year and are just need to get 1 more course completed, or are doing some sort of academic upgrading year, they have to have completed 15 of their core courses during their 4 years in high school. They also need to have completed 10 of those courses by the end of grade 11. So this is also super important, because you can't save the majority of your core courses until grade 12. So this is where students can get in trouble if they weren't really academically paying attention in grade 9. And I'm going to go, Ashley, I'm seeing your question. I'm going to go back to it in a minute because it's about amateurism. So I'll finish this up and then I'll go back to that. So just be aware that for students enrolling after August 1st, 2018, which at this point is going to be pretty much any student you're working with, the Division II minimum GPA requirement is changing to a 2.2. So as you saw in the previous slide, it used to just be a 2.0, and for Division I, 2.3. So the change is now going to be 2.2 for Division II. And as you can see, the core course requirements are slightly different for Division I and II, which can be helpful for students, like I was mentioning about that pesky English requirement that happens sometimes in Ontario. Those students, even if they're no longer eligible for Division I, would be eligible potentially for Division III. Division II, I mean, sorry. Division II with 3 years of English. So here's what your timeline looks like. Grade 9, work with your counselor to map out your core courses. And I know this can be early. Some students aren't thinking ahead as far back as, as soon as grade 9, but as much as they can do that. And also just what you can do is make any counselors who tend to have a lot of student athletes, make them familiar with the core courses, the division worksheets, which again, Brenda's going to point those out to you, and making sure they're familiar with those resources so they can be helping students early on. In grade 10, they should get in the eligibility center, and they should start prioritizing highly visible tournaments, leagues, and showcases. Most really competitive teams, like in Division I, are going to be recruiting students as early, they're going to be looking at them as early as grade 9 and 10, and then they start recruiting them in grade 11. Students who come to you in grade 12 are frankly behind the curve and are highly unlikely to be recruited into a Division I sport. Division II, Division III, the other, NAIA, these are all still a possibility in grade 12, but for very competitive athletics, grade 11 is really when the action happens. So students should be taking and sending their SAT and ACT results in grade 11 to make sure they have something on the books so that coaches can understand whether or not the student is academically prepared for their institution. So even though the minimums are going to be something like grade point average minimums are something like 2.3, your student is not going to Stanford with a 2.3 GPA. There are certain minimums that highly competitive schools need their students to reach. I worked with a student once who was being recruited for water polo to Princeton, and she was told by the coach, based on her GPA and everything, this is back in the day when it was out at 2,400, she said, you need to get a 2,100 on your SAT and we'll give you a full scholarship. So she was under a lot of pressure, but that can happen at the more elite institutions because they can't take students into their institution that they don't think are going to do well academically. So the heaviest recruiting period for coaches, like I said, is in grade 11, and most of the restrictions that coaches have are lifted September 1st of the grade 11 year. We're not going to get too deeply into restrictions because there's a lot of them and the calendars are different for each sport. But basically what needs to happen is students need to become familiar with their sport, with their recruiting calendar and when coaches are allowed to be in contact with students. Basically in grade 9 and 10, the contact is very limited, and by September 1st of grade 11 for most sports, the coaches can be in more full contact as far as placing phone calls, meeting students in person, etc. The reason there's limitations on students, on contact with students, this has a lot to do, it's hard in an international context to understand the reasoning behind this, but you need to think about in the US, you know, big sports like hockey, big sports like basketball or football, where the strongest, most sought after students, we don't want coaches going after them all throughout the year, all kinds of day, stalking them on campus, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these rules are in place to help protect the athletes and to make sure that there's a process that keeps everybody playing with the rules. In grade 12 is when you can go on official visits. An official visit is when the school pays for you to visit them. You can go on up to 5 official visits in Division I, an unlimited number of official visits in Division II. But to be quite honest, they take a lot of time and energy, and they're during the school year. So usually students will only go on 1 or 2 official visits to their super top choices. You must have an SAT or an ACT score in the eligibility center to go on an official visit. So I'm going to say that one more time. A student cannot go on an official visit in grade 12 until they have an SAT or ACT score in the eligibility center, which is why they should take it in grade 11, because the first grade 12 option is in October. Your scores won't get into the eligibility center by the end of October, and now you can't do your official visits until November. So your timing gets way, way off if you don't do your SAT or ACT in grade 11. The Eligibility Center will request and receive amateurism certificates. Your counselor will send your final transcripts and will also have to send your high school diploma. And then eventually, if you've been recruited, you sign a national letter of intent to go to the university that you've been recruited to. An important note about National Letter of Intent, I'll make 2 notes. First of all, it has its own website. So you should go to the website and watch some of their little cartoon videos to learn more about what the National Letter of Intent is. I believe it's nli.org. I'll look it up and put it in the notes. And the second thing is, this is a legal document. And it's actually a legal document with the university the student is going to. So let's say, for example, the student has been recruited to play field hockey at the University of Texas. So when the student sits down and signs the letter of intent, they are agreeing that they will attend the University of Texas for 1 year, and it doesn't say that they're agreeing anything with the coach or with the sport. They're agreeing that they will attend the university for a year. So once you sign that, you've made that legal commitment to go to the school. And if after the first semester the student is unhappy or wants to be recruited to another school, they must stay throughout the remainder of the year, and then they can potentially be recruited somewhere else if that's what they want to do. So there are some rules around that. It's important for students to understand those. There we go. Thank you, Maria Mercedes. So I'm going to just, before I get into recruitment, I'm going to jump back to Ashley's question. She asked if a student who participates in local competition because the sport is not available at their school, would they be ineligible? So Ashley, no. Club sports are usually at the amateur level. Amateurism has to do with being paid to play. As far as an amateur, you don't get paid to play, and you probably pay out of your own pocket to participate. Whereas a professional is an athlete who receives some sort of compensation.
Can I pitch in there too?
Yeah, jump in, please.
Most likely, someone that just plays sports in a school, unless it's a super competitive school, it's probably wouldn't be enough for them to be getting a full scholarship. So really, a lot of times it's at the club level or at the national team level where you are playing in order to be able to get that scholarship.
Right, and at the national team level for these, like, you know, the under 19s or whatever, they are amateurs, and they do that. They're definitely purposeful to make sure that students can, so that they still can participate as students when they go to university. Brenda, I mean, are there any national level teams that would not be considered amateur level?
Not that I know of. I mean, unless most national teams, or it depends. I mean, maybe soccer. I think they get, like, you know, here, for those that went to the World Cup, for example, they got a huge amount of money. The players did, but they're also well over 30. So I think it'll probably depend on the sport. But as you say, at the sub-19 level, you're usually not paying at a World Cup soccer championship either. But the important thing is that they do not get paid. I mean, they could play at a national team and go to World Cup, but they just have to refuse the prize if they were to, like, you know, get a $500,000 prize, for example.
I would think most people who have rocketed to that level probably just skip university. Yeah.
Or exactly.
Go back to it later. Oh, now we've opened up the floodgates. So there's a few questions. Maybe Brenda, we can take the time to answer a couple of these questions together.
Sure.
Go into the recruitment. So I see one. It says, do you know how it works for a student who graduates in November and not in May?
It's the same thing as for students here in the Southern Hemisphere. Everyone graduates in December or November anyway. So they just have basically a semester where they would be, you know, playing and improving their English. Sometimes some universities may have them start and redshirt. It depends on when the season for that sport is, but it is also common for some athletes or some universities to bring the student athlete onto their university, and have like a semester where they're redshirting, which basically means they can practice with the team, but they can't compete for the university yet.
And so for Irina's question, she says, what if the tournaments have a prize in cash? Would that be considered as pro? Yes, that's exactly what we mean. So for students who are in a sport, like you mentioned for tennis, a lot of competitions have monetary rewards. That's a sport where the student needs to be very familiar with the amateurism rules and making sure that they're adhering to them. And it might mean that they have to decline monetary prizes.
I think with tennis, actually, there's a cap. I think they can, if I'm not mistaken, I've checked the NCAA guide, but I think there's a cap on the money that they can accept. But that's the only, like, basically sport where they do have that. I think I read that somewhere.
Because there are, like, a lot of just smaller prizes, even for younger people.
Yes. I'm from Peru. How can a student athlete get on? Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about next. So, Jessica, why don't you take on the next section, because that's what we're addressing.
Yeah, so thank you, Kelly, for that nice segue. How can a student athlete get on the radar of U.S. universities? So we're going to talk a little bit about getting recruited. So I know there's various challenges about getting recruited based on distance to the United States, and that can be a limiting factor for some people. But the good news is we're living in a digital age where there's a lot of resources available to students that are free or low cost that they can use, and if they use masterfully, can help get on the radar of coaches. So first things that you can prioritize. Now, if you have the money and you're able to do it, a lot of sports have showcase tournaments in the U.S. or scouting or showcase tournaments is what they're called. There's also, during the summers, oftentimes there's elite leagues or camps, and you can find out, basically the student can find out through internet searches, but also I would say the coach. This is where the student's coach is going to be one of their best resources. The coach can help them determine what and where would be a good place to spend their time and effort as far as camps are concerned, and where there's going to be people who might be recruiting. But beyond, if traveling is restrictive and these things aren't possible, beyond that, what a student definitely should be doing is getting an online presence and setting it up so that you can send those links to coaches who you want to show your skills to. So one of my favorite ways to do this is through a player profile. So we're going to talk a little bit about creating a sports CV and a sports cover letter, which I think are very important things to do as well. But there's also kind of a newer way that a lot of students are doing this, which is through these profile sites. Now, you'll see when you go on these sites, and I have some listed here. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just many that I've found just by researching. Many of these sites have a free function and they have paid functions. Now, I'm sure you guys feel the same as I do, that if it's free, that's usually the way that I like to do it. But free also means more work. So what students can do is use the templates available here to upload pictures, upload videos. There's nice graphs and charts where you can enter in your statistics. And so it's a really nice way to keep track of that information. And then it's a live document. Because the problem is when you send an email that says, hey coach, here's my statistics, and then you plan a tournament and the next day your statistics are different. Whereas if you have a live link, then every time you update that link, then the coach is getting that information, is able to see that information as well. So it's not just something static like an email. So while the student can create a player profile online and then should be researching universities and programs online as well. And this does take a lot of time and effort. What happens with these player profile sites is if they pay more, then the site is what you're paying for is the site to potentially match you with coaches who might be interested. That's what the paid function is. So it's just taking that thing that you would do yourself and you're paying a website to do it for you. So when you contact coaches, first you should visit a university websites to find different programs. And so you'll find coaches' contact info. And what you'll find also is a recruiting questionnaire. So I'm going to just open up this site and you're going to see that, like for example, I was working with a student who's interested in rowing and she's interested in Boston University. And when you go on their page, you're able to find right here, there's a recruitment questionnaire. And when you click on that, it's going to ask you for a bunch of information. And of course, when it comes to your athletic information, this is going to be pretty important in the coach determining whether or not they're interested in actually recruiting you. Here's an example of what an online player profile can look like. So you can upload, you can have a picture of yourself, you can have some of your basic information, you can have some videos, and then you should be including a lot of information. See how it's really nicely set out. Now this student doesn't have it all the way filled in, but Caleb's videos are really nice. We won't watch them right now, but you'll have you'll have the link if you want to watch a really nice recruitment video. You can also set up a YouTube channel to put your videos on. You can create a sports CV, and we'll show a sample in a second, which should have some of these things on it, your achievements, your goals. It should have contact info, grad date, should have some of your academic information, because like I said, academics are also important in recruiting depending on the strength of the university and their academic programming. And then, of course, your links to your videos. The videos themselves should be a couple of things. Highlight videos, number one, and then full game tape, number two. They need to have both. And then a cover letter is a good idea when you're contacting coaches. You can write it like you almost would a cover letter to a job. Highlight your academics and athletic achievements and make sure it's personalized to the program. So here's a really nice template for a sports CV. Again, we're going to share these slides so you guys will be able to, we have the templates as well in our resources, so I won't stay on these too long. And then here's a sample cover letter. And as I mentioned, there are different recruiting calendars for the different sports. So athletes need to be informed about their individual sports calendars and when they have different kinds of contacts with coaches. Once you see like there's contact period, evaluation period, quiet period, dead period, it all feels a bit confusing. Hopefully this is a place where the student and coach can work together. If the coach is really not informed on this information, then you can help the student find all the information, and then the student should be sharing that with their coach as well. When we mentioned official visits, and I forgot to mention, in contrast to an unofficial visit, which is just anybody can visit a school anytime as an unofficial visit on their own dollar. The important thing is if a student decides to go on an unofficial visit, they should contact the coach and see if the coach is willing to have a sit-down meeting with them while they're on campus, and if they're allowed, if the coach will let them watch a practice or potentially meet some of the athletes. So during grade 11, if students are in the US or are able to get up there and can do their own unofficial visits, that can be a really great way to see if the sports program is a good match, and then of course do a campus tour and see if the campus is a good match. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it back over to Brenda, where she's gonna talk more about applying the parallel process and finding the best fit school,
Okay,
as well
so
as
now
resources.
I need to share my screen, which I think, am I doing? Can you guys see it? No, right? I'm coming. Compartir. And can you see my screen now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. So applying and the best fit. When I was in school, we always used to talk about, we're student athletes, student first and athlete second. That may, be a little fuzzy at times, and some universities or some teams may feel slightly different. But you are a student first and you are an athlete. So part of finding the right fit is making sure that you are a good fit for the university as a student, as well as a good fit for the university as an athlete. You also have to remember that if you, as Danica was stating, for example, you are playing for a school like Princeton, if you cannot meet the academic requirements, if you cannot continue to perform at a certain level, and you are not getting a certain grade point average, you eventually may see that your scholarship may be affected, because it also affects the team. Sometimes certain teams have like a specific GPA that they need to maintain, and some of this is very relative and is established by each coach. But some school or universities may have specific rules on this kind of information. So just like we talked about the 5 steps in Education USA about applying to university, researching your options and making sure that the university that you're applying to has the interest or the major that you're interested in pursuing, how you're going to be financing your studies, and do they meet what kind of campus do they have. For an athlete, you have to kind of have 2 parallel processes. So while you're working on, doing the SAT and applying to university, you also have to make sure that you would fit to the right school on the right team as an athlete. So the first step, if I've kind of done like a similar 5 steps, but for an athlete kind of point of view, you would start researching your options. Is your athletic level high enough to compete at the NCAA level? Or would the NAIA be a better option for you? Or if, for example, someone hasn't taken SATs or they don't have a very good level of English, maybe they would be better off starting off at the NCJAA. So that's where you would start assessing yourself, asking yourself certain questions about where you are and what you want to achieve. The second step, just like it is for a student, would be how are we going to finance our studies, right? If you are pursuing a full sports scholarship, fantastic. But we do know that those are competitive. And so sometimes you can, look at the different options. So you might be able to, say, for example, apply to a Division II sport, get some athletic scholarship funds, but at the same time, maybe they can also give you some academics or merit-based scholarships, or maybe you can play at an NCAA Division III university and just on academic scholarship, and then you don't have to worry about, if this is something that you want to continue to do throughout the whole entire time or not. Step 3, just like it is for a student where you're completing your application, there's also a series of steps that you have to complete if you want to play sports. So Jenica talked about registering with the NCAA or the NAIA Eligibility Center, right? Meeting, creating your profile, making sure you have the amateurism certificate, and making sure you have the core courses that you need in order to meet the academic requirements. You would also need to send your standardized test scores. So you would need to send SAT and ACT or ACT test scores. And this is important also, even if a college is test optional. So the university might have a policy about being test optional. If you want to play for a Division I sport and the university is test optional, you still have to take the SAT or ACT and send it to the NCAA. And as Jenica said, even though the NCAA will not require TOEFL, as an international student, you have to take the TOEFL, and you will have to submit this to the university. Not to the NCAA, but yes, to the university. While you're completing your application, you will need to send your sports CV and your cover letters to the coaches, or create your online profile. And eventually, later on in the part of step 3 would be, obtaining your amateurism certificate and signing your letter of intent. And then, just like it would for a student, you would need to apply for a student visa if you need it and prepare for your departure. So when you look at all these things that the students need to juggle, student athletes need to juggle, it does add an extra layer of work, definitely. So if for a student, it might take 12 to 18 months. For an athlete, it would definitely take at least 18 to 24 months. The ideal time to start creating your profile is when they're in 10th grade. When they're in 11th grade, they can still do it, but it starts to get tight. And if a student is walking in when they're in 12th grade, they might be better off exploring other options and then transferring to a Division I or Division II NCAA school. But it's really, coaches are looking forward to, or they're looking at confirming their teams well in advance. So that's why students, one of the most important things is that you're reaching out to them or they're reaching out to you when they're in 9th or 10th grade, so they can start planning. It's important for them to go to a university where they want to go, regardless of the team. As I said, you're a student first and then an athlete. So you definitely need to make sure that, I always ask this question, or say this question too. You want to be at a school where, say you have an injury and you cannot play sports anymore. Would you still be able to fulfill your academic and your personal goals at this university? If the answer is yes, then that would be a good academic and athletic fit for you, right? But if the answer is no, if the only reason why you're going to that school is because they have the great team, but they do not have the major you're interested in, or they're really just too small and you're going to be bored out of your mind there, that would not be a good fit. So it's important to ask yourself, or have students ask themselves these questions. Are they, if they weren't a great student, for example, they maybe had like a 2.5 average, would a school like Stanford be a good fit for them? No, because they're going to be, first of all, they probably wouldn't get in, but they will also be struggling academically the whole time, which might eventually put their scholarship in jeopardy too. And also, in terms of academic fit, you want to, obviously you need to make sure that they have a sport that you are interested, but you can also take it a step further and look at also like the roster of each team. For example, I'll talk about the teams because I played in a team sport, so I'm familiar with that language. But for example, if I was a middle blocker playing volleyball, I'd also look at the roster and see how many middle blockers they currently have. If they have, 3 middle blockers that are, maybe 2 are freshmen and 1's a junior, then very likely they are not going to be looking for middle blockers. So maybe I would be better off looking at another university where I have better chances of being recruited. And so just like we kind of have that list of 8 universities, you kind of, in a way, need to make 2 lists. Maybe one is the university, the academic, the university that meets your academic criteria, and then the list that has the teams that you would like to play with, and kind of see where these cross over, and that would be the list of universities that a student athlete would be applying to. Maybe here, I'm going to go back to where are my Google Hangouts? Oh, that's not a good idea. I was going to see if there's any questions at this point in time, but I can't go to that screen without making you guys see that weird image. So
you're good right now. There's no questions.
Okay. So just, as we start to maybe wrap up a little bit, I'm going to quickly go over like the different players that would be involved, and then we're going to go over a case study where we can just kind of go through the scenario of a student coming into our office. So obviously there's a student athlete. The student athlete is the main player in this scenario. They're the ones that are looking to be recruited. They're the ones that need to be doing the work to make sure that this is a right fit, that they and evaluating what they want to do. What are their goals academically, personally, athletically, etc. As Jenica stated, the local coach will also play a key role. So not only the coach that is recruiting at the university, but the local coach that knows the player can help a lot, by sometimes ideally by guiding the students, but my experience is that a lot of the local coaches don't have the experience to be able to really guide them, but they can still help them by writing a letter of recommendation or by assisting the athletes in preparing their CV or getting a video and preparing the stats that they need in order to be able to prepare their CV and things like that, right? Then you have the university admissions department. So you still, as I said, you still have to meet the requirements as a student. So on one hand, you have to apply to a university like any regular student would be applying to the university. But then there's also definitely the relationship that the admissions department will have with the athletic department. They're going to be in communication with each other, or they should be in communication with each other to communicate with the information regarding the prospective student athlete, what documents have been submitted, what's pending, etc. Then another key player is definitely the athletic department of the university that you're applying to, the coaches, as they're the ones that will determine the scholarships, the positions available. And I find that they play a key role in really guiding prospective student athletes through the application process. If they really want a player, they will bend over backwards to help them and guide them through the process. At least that was definitely the case for me. And then our role as Education USA Advisors is help the students as we do, just like we do with the 5 steps, and help them navigate through the maze of, what test you need to take, when do you need to do it by, how do you find a list, how do you find out what scholarships are available. Our role is also to help students guide them through the process and understand what they need to do to get recruited. So that's part of what we're doing here with you all, is giving you some basic information so that you can better guide students through the process of understanding what the NCAA is, NAIA, or the NCJA, how do you meet the core requirements, the academic requirements, etc. So now we're just gonna, I know Jenica in the section on eligibility or getting recruited, shared some of the sites, but let's just, pretend basically that, a student walks into your Education USA Advising Center in April. The student is a junior and they have a pretty good level of English, and they have a B average in school, and they play volleyball for the junior national team, and she's interested in applying to a college in the United States and playing for a sports scholarship. So this part was supposed to be a little bit interactive, but since I can't really see or hear you all, I'm not sure how easy that's going to be. But
Brenda, what we can do is I've got the chat open, so I can just
you do?
yeah, if you want to.
Okay.
you want to leave that up, and I'll just relay
Sure. I
what
mean,
people are doing.
so this is, I guess, the part for them to, kind of share what they have learned, and where would you start? If a student comes to you asking for information on a sports scholarship, how to get started, what would your suggestions be? Oops. No.
Yeah, just keep it on the slide.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. Anyway, so, you would definitely start, maybe I'll just guide myself through it. So, you would start off by, just like if you were with a student, what are they interested in studying? Do they have any specific preferences? Maybe like they have an aunt that lives in a certain state, or maybe they don't like big colleges and they really are into small liberal arts colleges. You would ask them if they've taken the ACT or the SAT for sure. You'd also ask them about the TOEFL and their grades, and you'd kind of be gauging their level of English as well while you're having this conversation, hopefully. But then, you would also kind of guide them through the athletic part of it, right? What level? Now, if the person is playing at the junior national team, most likely they would be a good candidate for applying to the NCAA, right? So one thing I would probably do is, you can go to the NCAA website, for example, because, where do you start? How do you know which universities are playing in the NCAA? Or how do I know which ones have a Division I school, right? So I could go to the NCAA website, for example, and here I go to the section on sports. And for example, then I would go to volleyball, where you can see here, and I would click on the W, which is for women's volleyball, right? And that will take me to the Women's Volleyball Division I website, right? And here, a good way to maybe go through this is also rankings. So if you click on rankings, it'll take you to a list of the different universities that are in the NCAA in Division I and where they are. So for example, I'll just use my personal experience in this case. I was a B student. I was a solid B student. And I was also a good athlete. But I wanted to go to a university where I had more of an academic challenge than an athletic challenge. So I didn't want to be in one of the top 10 schools, and I don't think I probably would have gone and recruited to one of the top 10 schools either. So I probably would have focused more on the maybe like, the universities are in the rank 30 to 60 kind of thing. So that would have given me like a place to start looking, right? It gives me an idea what universities, where to start, and what universities to look for. So let's just say, I come across GW and I'm really interested in GW. So I would go to the GW sports page, right? So I could go to the GW sports page, and I would then look at the different sports that they have, and I would go to the volleyball website, and I can see here their schedule of games. I could also see their roster, right? So for example, I was a middle blocker, so I would be looking at, for example, one way that I could see if they're going to be in need of middle blockers is looking, okay, so they have a junior who's currently a middle blocker, they have a senior who's currently a middle blocker, and a freshman. So I know that the senior will be graduating soon. The junior they probably already have someone lined up for that person, but the junior will also be graduating by the time I'm applying. So that might be, I know that they'll be needing a middle blocker, right? So that would be a good information to have. And on the website, I can also, they have all sorts of links, just like Jenica showed you the link for, signing up. Here you can also click on the link for prospective student athletes and put all your information to sign up with. Oh, here they have I guess that's not quite, but they'll have a similar page where you can sign up, put your basic information, and you can also get information on like the schedule. You can also watch them playing, for example, live on YouTube channels, and then you can kind of see where that team is playing at, what level do they have, and would I be a good fit for that level, right? So that would be a way to search for universities. Kind of like when you say like, okay, well, where do I start? That would be a place where I would suggest the way to start. Obviously, you want to make sure that they're signing up with the Eligibility Center and get that process rolling. As Jenica says, it's snail mail, so you will have to send your test scores, or you can send your test scores automatically, obviously, but the transcripts will have to be sent via regular snail mail. And signing up for the different profile sites, but you still might want to prepare a good old, Word document or PDF version of a CV and a cover letter as well to have. And contacting coaches, if you go back to the information on each website, you will be able to find information on the coaches and how to, and getting how to get a hold of them, which you can do via email, unless you'd rather go through the online profiles that you created with one of the sites. Then you would apply and see what happens and wait for the responses and wait to see what scholarship offers you get, analyze the best option for you. And then once you have that information, and you make the decision, you assign the letter of intent. One question I always, get a lot too is how, is it hard to get used to the rhythm of playing sports in college? And what I tell students is that in order to get a sports scholarship, you're already used to that rhythm. I was playing volleyball 4 hours a day, 6 days a week from 9th grade to 12th grade. So when I got to university and had to play volleyball 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, it was no big difference for me. I already knew how that schedule, that rhythm was. But it is, when you are playing at a Division I or II sport, it is an intense rhythm. You have, 3 hours a day where you're playing and practicing your sport while you're in season, with games every weekend. While you're in season, you have games basically every weekend. It was Friday, Saturday. A lot of times you travel. So a lot of times you're traveling from Thursday to Sunday. But at the same time, universities do give student athletes a lot of support services, like students get to sign, or the athletes get to sign up for classes before everyone else does, because that way you can accommodate your schedules in order to take classes that are offered Monday, Wednesdays, and then Tuesday and Thursday mornings, for example, so you could travel on Thursday afternoons if you had to. So anyways, I guess that's a little bit off the topic now. But, suggestions for all the students basically is, be persistent, have them do their homework. It's a big decision. It takes time to find universities that meet your academic needs and add to that an athletic component, and it definitely makes it even tougher. They should definitely see about official and non-official visits, especially for international students that don't always have a clear idea of what a campus is like and what it's all like. It's a good way to get that firsthand visual experience. It's not necessary to use an agent. They can do it on their own. So that's another important thing for them to remember. So now I'm going to share, there's definitely the slide here where we have all the information and some links, but I also want to take you to the Google Drive that we created with information. So I'm going to, let me go back here. So this is my unit, and I'm going to go to Sports Scholarship. So you all have access to this folder now, and this folder is divided into different subfolders. So obviously the presentation that we're using right now is this one right here. It's called Supporting Student Athletes. And then there's another presentation on sports scholarships, which is the one that I have used with athletes or student athletes that are interested in getting a sports scholarship. Then we have subfolders for every one of the different associations. So I'll start with the NCAA Association. So this is the worksheet that Jenica was talking about when we talked about Division I and Division II worksheet, and in making sure that they have meet the core requirements in order to get that academic eligibility from the NCAA. So it's it looks a little more daunting than it is, but once you sit down and go over it, it's really not that complicated. And if you ever need help with any of these, you can ask either one of us. But that would help students figure out if they meet the requirements. Then here is in this folder right here, or this PDF right here, this is the guide for the college-bound student athlete. There's a new version published every year, so it does change. Just like, I think that the main change this year, for example, was that the GPA requirement changed a little bit. But here, this is the Bible. They should, to any student that is interested in a sports scholarship, should read this front to back. They have information on, some of the recruitment calendars, the Division 1 and 2 worksheet, meeting the core courses, and just a little bit of everything. Okay. Now there's also a section for international students. But international students might also want to look at, there is a guide that is specific to international students. So this document right here, which is called International Academic Standards for Athletic Eligibility, is particular for international students. So if you, they have some basic information, but then Jenica was talking about the country outlines. So here they'll have information specific to each country on basically what class system or what are the requirements in each country, and the general educational layout in each country. So that is also important for each athlete to have a look at. Then there's just some basic transferring that might be also, if someone is interested in transferring, that you could have, and there's some quick reference guides that you can also look at. NAIA, there's not quite as much information out there as there is with the NCAA, but they also have the same, college guide or guide for the college-bound student athlete, and then they have a similar one with information that is specific to international student athletes. And then the NJCAA, which has some information for students as well, or for students that are interested in going that route. Here we have also some information for student athletes that I have found and kind of compiled over time. This first one here is a triptych that we made with the basic steps for it. A lot of it is geared towards NCAA, but I've tried to make it generic enough that they can also have information for NAIA or the NJCAA. But feel free. I have the InDesign version somewhere in my files. If anybody wants to replicate this triptych and put their specific information for their country, it's definitely feel free to ask me for it and use it. I have no problem with that. And here there's also a few other resources that I have found useful. So one is, for example, how to create a college recruiting resume. And it has, the thing I like about this one is that it has some specific information about like statistics or information that you would include for specific sports. So a lot of times, it's very, I might be saying a huge stereotype thing, but the Americans tend to be very into statistics and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes other countries aren't quite as into that. But anyways, but it doesn't mean that you don't need to prepare it, right? So here, for example, they'll go basketball specific information. So they'll say what kind of information should you highlight, or for example, baseball specific information. So that's why I like this. This document right here. Then there's another one. This one is outdated though. It's Guide to the College-Bound Athlete. So some of the information that they have, like on the core requirements, the GPA requirements, that part is outdated. But I like this one because they also have information on, just basic questions that a student should ask themselves. Questions related to the right fit that we have been talking about. Then, it's a repeat of the different action plan that, what they should be doing at each grade level. And then they have some information just some basic questions that they can ask themselves, that when they are in contact with a coach or a school, they should, it gives them some ideas of what kind of information or questions they can be asking. And it also has some templates that they can refer to, and some basic terms that students can become familiar with if they're going to be soon in contact with coaches in universities, so that they're also not quite so lost in the process. Here's some information on making a recruiting video. So, that some of it is that can be applied to all. It doesn't have to be a professionally made video where people are spending tons of money, but there should be certain standard information that is transmitted in this video. For example, if you are playing in a team sport, you want to make sure that you are identifying yourself so people know where to look. So you can, different things that you should look for, or the length, for example. You want to keep the highlight video short, but you also, as Jenica said, you want to have access for the coaches to be able to see videos of you playing an entire game. So this is also something that could be useful to students in the process of this process. And then here, Jenica also has an athletic checklist, which is a little bit, again, a little bit of what are the different players, what are the different associations that students should be, that they can look at, and then a little bit of what the checklist, what should they be doing in each grade? What should you be doing in grades 9 and 10? And then what should you be doing in grade 11, and what should you be doing in grade 12? So this is also kind of useful to make sure that the students haven't missed any steps in the process. That's it for this part of the presentation, and I'm sure you guys have lots of questions. So I'm gonna go to that. I'm gonna take myself off the share screen now and go to the questions.
Yeah, all right. Let's, okay, I'm off mic, or on mic. So Kelly had a couple of questions. So she has quite a few questions, actually. So let's start with, I'll read a couple to you. The first one, this one is going to be better for you than me, Brenda. So first of all, I do want to mention to everyone, Canada has by far the most student athletes in the US, and in every single sport imaginable. And it's so close that the kind of recruiting that takes place here is going to be much different. So Kelly's question is, could you please mention what the top sports programs are that the US universities most actively recruit for in our region?
I would say definitely soccer. Soccer is a big, I mean, a lot of it's gonna depend on even each country within our region, but soccer is a big sport in the Western Hemisphere, Latin America down. Volleyball is also a big sport, and where a lot of South Americans have good teams as well. Tennis is another sport that is, that we know of a lot of Chileans, for example, that have gone to play tennis in the universities in the United States. But I would say that a lot of it's for example, Chile has a lot of field hockey, and they have a really good team, but that's not, I don't think that's the case for Peru, for example. Peru, you have really strong tennis, golf, volleyball, and soccer. So I know, Jenica, you were saying that ice hockey is really big there. So I think, just because someone isn't in a popular sport, though, in their country, it doesn't mean that they should feel they cannot apply. I think a lot of it will be based on how good an athlete performs in that sport. And they may be, that great, awesome, fantastic, 1 in a million judo player in the Peruvian team that, I don't know if judo is a sport. Actually,
no.
Not lacrosse player. Not example, exactly. That made on the swimming team. The U.S. tends to have great swimmers and great swimming teams, but that doesn't mean that there can't be an international swimmer on the team.
Yeah, I think it really has a lot to do with their ability level. So yes, there might be some coaches that come down for particular sports, but that doesn't mean that just because coaches don't come down for a student sport that they won't be seen. That's why if they can get to the States for showcase tournaments, that's really helpful. Or if they can just make really good use of the internet resources, as well as contacting coaches, speaking to them over the phone or Skype. And it really has to do with the level of the student, to be quite honest. I mean, I have so many students who come to me who are like, oh, I'm interested in an athletic scholarship. And it's like, okay, so you play for your high school team. Nobody's recruiting you internationally if you're just like a good player. Like, you need to be on a national team, a provincial team. Like, you need to be playing at a high level. And if you're playing at a high level, then it's easy for you to reach out to coaches and say, hey, I'm interested in being recruited. And then so Kelly also had a follow-up question of, have you developed any strategic alliances with leading sport institutions or clubs within your countries to promote sports scholarships possibilities with the United States? So Kelly, I'm going to say again, for me, I don't know how relevant. I haven't done anything like that, especially because there's students being recruited for all sports. But it's something that I am working on a bit with a couple of local high performance basketball teams, as far as giving them more and more information on the things as new teams, what the coaches should be doing, and trying to support them. So it is something I am starting to work on a little bit more, but it is going to be on like a fairly local level for Ottawa. Brenda, what about you?
We haven't built any alliances yet. I did earlier this year meet some people from the Ministry of Sports in Chile, though. And that was a contact or meeting that the embassy had with them, and where they followed up and asked me to meet with them. Not necessarily to build an alliance, but yes, they did have a national tournament where they brought players from different schools that had one at the district level, and they brought them together. And they did ask me to come and speak to them about sports scholarships. At least in this first instance, it wasn't. The students were very young, so it wasn't as productive and effective as I thought it would be. But it's the first approach, and I did give them my feedback to meet with them. So that would maybe be a place to start. I know there are some schools here. They have like the schools that have like a free curriculum, and so this where the athletes go and they can and they attend, and I know a lot of them have coaches or agents that work with them, and so a lot of them haven't necessarily come to us, but I think it is important to let them know that we do exist, so that they have options available, and they can make an informed choice.
Okay, so the next question is, are any of the guides available in Spanish? And Brenda, you had a couple of guides. Did you include them in the resource link?
They are in the resource list. They're, let me see, if you go to the, at least in the NCAA subfolder, they have the Guía NCAA para Estudiantes Internacionales. So they have printed one and developed one in Spanish. Let me see if the NAIA one, no, the NAIA doesn't have one, but the NCAA folder has a guide that has been prepared in Spanish, and that's on there.
Great. And then another question is about receiving the Google Drive folder. So for whatever reason, YouTube doesn't allow you to copy paste into the chat. So you guys will get a follow-up email with the link to the resources. Let me see what else we got here. A few people are offering to translate into Spanish as well. I would suggest just double check the NCAA resources, because they actually have a whole part of their website that is called publications. And a lot of those publications are actually free publications. So it's where they put all their PDFs. So I would scour that area before you start translating anything yourself, because they do have quite a few pieces of information there. All right, Ashley's got a question. Even if a student athlete competes in the state and even perhaps regionally and does well, how do we know if he or she would be competitive enough to receive a scholarship from a Division I school in the United States? So that's the thing, Ashley. It's really hard to be the judge of that. A lot of that has to do with the fact that being an athlete, think about all the research you do when a student is just looking academically for schools. Now, double or triple that time. Athletic students have to be reaching out to coaches. If they think they are good enough for Division I, they need to be reaching out to coaches, giving them information, potentially having their coach contact their coach, and then seeing what happens. If a Division I coach wants a student, they're going to know about it. If all you're getting is radio silence on the other end, what it's saying is that Division I coaches are not maybe necessarily thinking that you would be a valuable enough asset to the team. So oftentimes when students aren't particularly sure, a lot of it is about doing the academic research as well and reaching out to teams at a bunch of schools that they're also really excited to go to in a multiple different divisions. Because then what happens is, good example, we have a great rowing program here at our all-girls school, and last year, one of the rowers really wanted to be recruited, and she ended up going to Smith College. Smith College is a Division III school, but she's receiving a full academic scholarship. So at the end of the day, she's rowing Division III, but she chose that because she got the academic scholarship. So she still gets to do the sport she wants, maybe not competing at the Division I level as she maybe originally thought, but getting the financials that she wants. So you kind of have to cast a large net, but using your academic standards can help you maybe pare down which schools and coaches you reach out to first. Brenda, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it's just like, how do we determine, in the end, it's not us who determines, it'll be the coaches. It's kind of like great students that apply to MIT, some get the full scholarship, some don't. What determined that? Maybe they're just looking for the guy that was interested in that particular area of study that year, and then next year the priorities change. It's the same thing with sports and teams. I think a lot of it, sometimes if it's a team sport, it's the team makeup, right? They need to have a roster that includes the middle blocker, the outside hitter, the setter. Once again, I'm talking about volleyball, but they're going to be looking for specific players each year to make and add to the team. But I think that it's important, just like you have the strategy, or at least here we use, the strategy of kind of applying to 2 dream schools, 3 target schools, and 3 backup schools. It would kind of be the same thing if, add to that the component of a sport. You would want to maybe have, 2 schools on that list where, it'd be great if you played on that team, and then maybe a few target schools where that your level of play is right around. And how do you know that? Once again, you can look at them playing live on the games and kind of see where you stand, or look at the statistics. If it's a sports like swimming or running, for example, you can measure your times against the times of the people that are on that team, and kind of evaluate your level of play there. But as kind of having that strategy of a few target schools and backup schools is also, you can also apply that in this case.
I think something that's super important too is just that, like, the students, the better they do at school, the higher the GPA they have is always going to help them as well. Because especially at institutions that are academically demanding, that will potentially tip a student over the edge if a coach is wanting to recruit certain students that aren't meeting the academic needs. Then they might have to, switch gears. Your student's English level, even though TOEFL is not necessary for the NCAA, as a recruiting tool, if the student is demonstrating a higher level of English, that'll also help demonstrate that they'll be able to succeed at the university and do well in their coursework. So honestly, especially for Division III is great. I don't discount Division III. If you're not sure about your students' athletic ability, and it seems like they love their sport, but like, whatever, they're doing well regionally, but it's like a toss-up, but they're a really strong student, reach out to Division III schools, because a lot of small liberal arts colleges are Division III schools. So great institutions where the student's going to get an amazing education, and at the same time can play their sport at still a fairly high level, but again, their funding's not tied to their sport. So I end up pushing Division III a lot with students who I don't feel super comfortable with really knowing exactly where they are with their sport, but seem to be very strong academically.
Also, the sports scholarships, they're renewed every year. So you have to sign as an athlete. You have to sign with your university every year. So if you're not meeting the academic requirements, for example, if you're not keeping up with the GPA that you need to meet, and once again, a lot of this may be determined by the university, but even within a university, you have some sports where you just have to keep, gymnastics. I can always think of the gymnastics. They had really high GPA that they had to keep in order to stay on the team. So if you're not meeting some of these requirements, your sports scholarship could be reduced or it could be canceled. So that's where it's also important to, ask yourself, okay, well, if that happens, I mean, will I still be in a university where I want to be going to? Also.
All right. There's no more questions coming through. I'll give you guys just a few more seconds if you want to include any more questions. I do want to note that we did spend most of our time on NCAA because just in general, you're not going to, because NAIA and NJCAA are not as competitive as divisions, they mostly have local students. I mean, they are going to do some recruiting, but they just don't have the budget. They're not going to be traveling internationally to recruit students. Really, the NJCAA is where you might be working with some students if they need English language. That might be a good place to go first if they need to up their grades, but they're a very strong athlete. But there's a limited number of scholarships in the Junior College Association, and I think you'll see a lot of those maybe given out more to some of the more kind of big money sports in the U.S. Brenda, maybe do you have any idea what the distribution is for junior college sports scholarships?
I don't. I didn't do that particular research, but the big money is in the NCAA Division I.
Yeah.
That's where the big money is. And two, yes. But in terms of like at a personal level, you won't get the full scholarship at a Division II, whereas you could get a full scholarship at Division I.
You can get full scholarships at Division II. They're just maybe there might be more broken up scholarships.
They might be broken, and that's also an important thing for students to remember. Like they may not, it's kind of like you can pool these funds together too. You can pool the merit-based scholarship, the academic scholarship, with a sports scholarship, and that could together be a very generous scholarship, which amounts to in some cases almost a full scholarship. So that's also important for them to realize. Mm-hmm. And that's where their academic merit will give them more possibilities for scholarships like this. Mm-hmm.
And we have one more question from Irina, which is actually a really good one. Can there be transfer students from the NJCC to universities with sports scholarships? And the short answer to that is yes. Mm-hmm. And basically, especially if students are not academically eligible, then there's a whole, like the transfer PDF goes through exactly what students need to do to be eligible, to be ready to transfer into a Division I or II school. All right, we took a lot of your time today. Thank you so much. We had so many people join us. We still have 35 people on right now, so thank you for taking an hour and a half of your time. And you can feel free to still reach out to me or Brenda if you have more questions about this topic.
Well, thank you very much, Jenica and Brenda. I think if you could all see us, we would be applauding. You would be, there would be standing ovation for all the useful and the wealth of knowledge that both of you have. It's just amazing. I'm very, very honored to have you be part of our network. Please don't go anywhere because you are it for our sports scholarship for now. And I'm very sure that many of us will be reaching out to you. I hope we don't bother you as much, but all of the information presented today and the resources that you created are outstanding. We're going to be sharing those, if you don't mind, globally as well, and putting them into our box accounts so that advisors from other parts of the world can also benefit from your programming. So thank you again. Thank you to all of the advisors that joined us this afternoon. And thank you for staying on. I was very impressed, but it also only reassures that of high interest in the region. And I'm happy that we were able to organize this session for all of you. So stay tuned for the next one, what topics we come up with and what great presenters we can recruit for that.
All right.
Thank you,
See you
everyone.
later, everyone.
Goodbye.
Ciao.